Welcome to the Clemson Dubcast. Monday morning, October 22nd. Chilly Monday morning. Everybody out there, I guess, is still trying to process that utter beatdown that took place on Saturday afternoon in Death Valley. I personally did not expect a 34-point margin of victory, and honestly, as everybody who watched that game can attest, felt more like a 54-point deficit. And here's the crazy thing. You might disagree with this, but it's just my take. NC State, still a pretty good team. And they just happened to run into an absolute buzzsaw of a Clemson team that was playing its best in a lot of ways. Not every way, but in a lot of ways. Defensive line was just absolutely frothing. Secondary was just determined to prove that it wasn't the supposed weak link that a lot of people were saying. Trevor Lawrence and the receivers, after probably hearing a lot of talk about Ryan Finley and his receivers, were probably coming into that game saying, hey, by the way, we're pretty good too. Lots of analysis of the current state of affairs with Clemson football at 7-0 at TigerIllustrated.com. Of course, Paul Strelo's always top-notch Monday recruiting insider is up right now. So if you're listening to this and you are not a subscriber to TI, not sure what you're waiting on. Title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast, Parham Smith, an Archenhold law firm in Greenville. Very happy to have them aboard. Couldn't do it without them. Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold, both Clemson grads, both huge fans. Forte of their firm is medical negligence. They represent patients and their family members in medical negligence actions. They also handle all sorts of other complex personal injury litigation. I can vouch for them. About 10 years ago, a family member had a pretty serious medical situation with one of the local hospitals. Went to Blake Smith, and he very quickly and authoritatively gave us some great advice, and we were very thankful for that. Parham Smith and Archenhold offers free consultations. Give them a call, 864-990-4581, or parhamlaw.com. Also sponsoring the podcast is the Abernathy Boutique Hotel, right down about a block or two from the stadium. Great location. All the ESPN folks who are in Clemson at various points throughout the year, they stay there and they absolutely love it just because it's so convenient, so nice with all sorts of amenities, including the Taps Bar and Cafe. They also have a tailgate outside before home games and grilling out hot dogs, hamburgers, got a DJ, got multiple bars outside. They're partnering with Jack Daniels for those events. So a lot of cool stuff over at the Abernathy. Got a lot of good beers on tap inside at Taps Bar and Cafe. My favorite is the Hugie Street IPA. So go on over there and give them a look. Check them out. Right across from Lower Lot 2 or on the internets at theabernathy.com. Okay, this is a great podcast guest-wise. Andy Staples joining us. A not-so-great podcast technically. Full disclosure, we don't have the most advanced setup with this podcast and how we record it. We are not professional sound engineers, so sort of learning on the fly. And when we record via phone, just sort of plug the cell phone into the recorder and try to eliminate all the glitches and possible glitches. Well, in this one, covered all the bases except one, and that was when you're on a phone call, you need to silence the incoming call notification. And so at the end of this podcast, you're going to hear a call coming in, and it's going to cut off some of Andy's response at the very end. The one positive is that I somehow didn't hurl any obscenities during this glitchy moment. So we could try to cut all those glitches out and try to make it super slick. But hey, let's do it, warts and all. So enjoy, and apologies for the weirdness at the end. Okay, happy to be joined by Andy Staples of, let me make sure I'm including everything, Sports Illustrated, Sirius XM, food writer extraordinaire. Did I miss anything?
That's pretty much it. I only got like 3 jobs right now. So always happy to take on more. So if anybody's hiring.
All right, so you've lived in Gainesville for a long time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I went to school at Florida and graduated in 2000 and assumed I would never, ever live in Gainesville again in my entire life. And then I started dating, probably right after graduation. It was like 3 weeks after graduation, I started dating a girl from Gainesville her family had moved to Gainesville when she was 14. And we ended up getting married. And then, so we wound up back in Gainesville. She was in grad school in Gainesville, and I got sent to Gainesville to cover Florida for the Tampa Tribune in 2004. So we've been in Gainesville since 2004. I had a couple stops along the way. I was in Knoxville for 2 years covering Tennessee for the Chattanooga Times-Free Press, and then my first 2 years with the Tampa Tribune, I was down there covering high schools. And but yeah, I've been in Gainesville since 2004, which makes me really old.
Not as old as me, and not as bad as it is when I walk around in a smaller town like Clemson.
In Clemson, South Carolina, exactly.
So, all right, the hours of your Sirius XM show are
1 to 4 p.m. Eastern time on Channel 84, which is the college sports channel. So the folks who are listening to this podcast, that is probably the channel you'd be most interested in. Although I recommend Lithium on 34, which is all the music I listened to in high school.
And so you're no longer doing that Sunday morning show?
No. When we went to 5 days a week, I came off the Sunday show. Although lately I've been filling in on the Saturday morning game day tailgate show from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. So it makes for a nice long Saturday, but it does get you prepped for the games. I did it last week, and it was nice because I felt like once the game started, I was really prepared because I'd gone over pretty much every one that morning.
I know nobody out there is going to feel sorry for the work demands of people who get to follow.
Not like we're digging ditches here.
But I'm not a normal person. I'm in the business, and I remember listening to you every Sunday morning last year going, good grief, how's he doing this? Like,
well, let me tell you the one about the when I look back on it, the show I can't believe actually happened. So last year they were doing a thing where they put one of us hosting a Saturday morning show wherever game day was. And so I drew the week that Michigan played at Penn State. And so Penn State is probably the most remote college town in America in terms of just trying to get in there on a game day weekend. And because it is dead center of the state, and it's 3 hours from Pittsburgh, 3 hours from Philadelphia, an hour and a half from Harrisburg. It's just not easy to get to. And especially depending on where you're coming from, the roads aren't all highways. So I was staying in Harrisburg because that was the cheapest hotel room I could get. Actually, I was staying in Hershey, which is suburban Harrisburg. And so the show was 6 to 9 a.m. Saturday. And then the game was 8 o'clock that night. So I left my hotel in Hershey, Pennsylvania at 3 a.m. Saturday. I drove to State College. I did this 3-hour show. I actually bought a day pass at Planet Fitness in State College to work out just to kind of keep myself awake to watch games the rest of the day. And Saturday, found like a sports bar and sat around and watched games for a while, and then went to the stadium about 5 o'clock to get ready to cover the Penn State Michigan game for SI. And so cover the game, do the interviews, and then you got to do this winding 2-lane road back to Hershey. I got back to my hotel room at 6 a.m. So I had left the hotel room at 3 a.m. Saturday. I returned to my hotel room at 6 a.m. Sunday. So 27-hour day. And then I slept for 3 hours, 2 hours and 55 minutes, and got up and did a 3-hour radio show.
And then flew home when?
That afternoon.
Good grief.
And wrote a 3,000-word column. So that hasn't happened again. There haven't been many like that. Now we did have there was one back when I did the Sunday night show, the year Lamar Jackson won the Heisman. So I was covering Alabama Ole Miss in Oxford that day, and Lamar blows up against Florida State, and that's all anybody's talking about. Remember, that was a noon game. The game day was there, and they rolled right into that game, and so they play that game at noon. It's like 63-21. The whole country's buzzing about Lamar Jackson. I call the editor for college football at the magazine. I'm like, we got to do something on this guy, like now. And he's like, yeah, we probably do. Do you think you could get an interview with him? I was like, maybe. So I text the football SID. SID is our slang for sports information director. I text the football SID at Louisville. And I said, I can't promise anything because you can never promise the cover. Like, that is absolutely forbidden at Sports Illustrated. Like, you do not promise the cover. But I very strongly hinted that Lamar Jackson would be on the cover of Sports Illustrated if I got some time with him that Sunday. And so I covered Ole Miss, Alabama, which was the 48-43 where Ole Miss still had a chance at the end and was throwing Hail Marys in the end zone. So I get that done. I write that story, and I start calling people affiliated with Lamar Jackson. I try, like, his mom didn't want to talk, but because she never wants to talk. Then I got his high school coach, and I got a bunch of other people. And Louisville says, okay, if you can be here by 2:00 tomorrow afternoon, you can have Lamar, Bobby Petrino, the offensive coordinator, whatever you need. And so I slept in Memphis that night, got up at like 6:00 that morning, and started driving, and made it to Louisville, interviewed Lamar. Still had that regular Sunday column I have to do, which is like, 3,000 words. So I talked to Lamar. I write the Sunday column. I had a 3-hour radio show from 7 to 10 that night. Did that. And then stayed up until 5 in the morning writing a Lamar Jackson magazine feature, which did appear on the cover, so I was not lying.
So a lot of sports writers out there, probably myself included, would have turned down that opportunity or would not have chased the opportunity or persisted with that cover story and said, you know what, no thanks. I'll maybe try again at a later date. But you just went after it.
Well, I mean, you don't turn down the cover of Sports Illustrated, and it doesn't. At least for me, it hasn't changed. Even though I've had, quite a few at this point. It's just because it still doesn't feel real. Like, I remember being a teenager and going to get my hair cut, and the Sports Illustrateds are laid across the table at the barber shop. And they had like the Pepperdine, the Waves roll in cover when Pepperdine won the College World Series. And just you remember all those things. And like, I remember my wife asked me one time when I was working for a newspaper, she's like, why don't you apply to like ESPN or Sports Illustrated? And I was like, because real people don't get those jobs. I was like, I don't even know how you would get one of those jobs. And so it still seems odd to me that it actually happened. So any chance I get, I'm going to take it. And also, I mean, those were those deals where that was a moment in college football where this guy just sort of exploded onto the scene. And, as you're kind of keeping a record of the sport, shouldn't you be there for that? Shouldn't you, shouldn't Lamar Jackson get a Sports Illustrated cover that year? Because he was the only thing anyone was talking about that week. And so I felt like, it's sort of, that's the job. And it was a lot of fun though. Cause it's one of those things where while you're doing it, you're like, I hate this. This is why am I doing this? And then when you get it done, you're like, that's cool. Cause then, a few days later when you have a little time to breathe, you're like, it was fine. That wasn't so bad.
When was the deadline?
I think they wanted it. Now the issue closes at around 6 p.m. on a Monday night. They wanted that story. I could have written it earlier. They told me they wanted it by Monday morning, so I filed it I'm gonna say 5:30 a.m. Monday. It was pretty easy after that. There wasn't a lot of, because we have fact checkers that'll call the people we interviewed and say, did they get this right? And they'll look up every fact that can be verified. And there wasn't a ton. It was a lot because it was a lot about his personality. It was a lot of him talking about how he changed and evolved as a quarterback from his freshman year to his sophomore year. So there's a lot of just quoted material there where the person is just saying it. So there wasn't a lot of heavy lifting. And the good news is the editors liked the way I presented the story the first time, so I didn't have to rewrite it. Sometimes you have to do that, but this time they were pretty happy with it. And the photo was unbelievable.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody remembers that photo, but he's making a cut against Florida State, and you can tell he's looking at where he's going to cut to. So his eyes are really wide, and then his foot is at an angle that it doesn't look like a human being should be able to have their foot at that angle as they're running full speed. But that's kind of what made Lamar Jackson special. So the photo was, and then you got, because it was on turf, so you got the rubber pellets flying, and I love when when the photo comes through, because I always laugh. Writers complain they'll cut our space in the magazine because they want to include a photo or run a photo bigger, and I always say they don't call it sports words. The pictures are the reason for this. And my favorite story, not necessarily my favorite stories, but my favorite covers at least are more because of the photo than because of anything I wrote. Simon Brudy's picture from Penn State the first week of this season, I had a story about Penn State and about them escaping Appalachian State. And the photo on the front is so beautiful. It's of Miles Sanders. He's crossed the goal line. He's in the end zone. He's dropping the ball behind his back. He's not like those Georgia guys who drop the ball before the goal line. And you just see the entire student section up and screaming. And it is just a gorgeous picture. And, Robert Beck had a photo of Kelvin Benjamin catching the game-winning touchdown pass in the Rose Bowl against Auburn for the national title that ran with my story on Florida State winning the national title. And I love that photo so much because it's Benjamin. He's fully extended. You could see Jameis Winston kind of out of focus in the background, watching as the ball floats toward his hands. Chris Davis, the guy who ran back to kick 6, is covering Benjamin, and you can tell he has no chance. He's got good coverage, but he's trying to cover a defensive end playing wide receiver. And so the photos, I think, make the stories. All the stuff I do is kind of window dressing.
Was that Louisville cover 2 years ago or 17 years ago?
It feels like a long time, right? Because Louisville was good at football then.
Amazing. I remember when Louisville came here to Clemson. I don't think
great game.
I don't think I picked Louisville to win, but I remember going into the stadium and sitting there and saying, I think Louisville's winning this game, just because of how dynamic that offense was, and of course how much of an otherworldly player Lamar was.
Yeah, I mean that was a fantastic game because Clemson's got Deshaun Watson and this massive. Nobody really gives the supporting cast of that offense the credit it deserves, but I mean Mike Williams. Nobody had a Mike Williams. And Lamar almost single-handedly beat those dudes.
Incredible. So your setup for your radio gig, I guess it's a very portable, easily transported.
Yeah. It's a box about the size of a bread box. I don't know how we determined that bread box was going to be the standard measure of size for stuff, but in this case, it is basically the size of a bread box. And you plug an Ethernet cord into it, and voila, it sounds like you're in the studio wherever you are.
And so I'm guessing you do a lot of your shows from your house and from hotel rooms.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it used to be, sometimes it doesn't work in the hotel room and you have to go down to the business center. That's always fun because you really annoy people when you're trying to do that. So I've tried to make sure I get in the room and make sure everything's working. And but there was one time where, for whatever reason, I had checked it the night before and it worked, and then it didn't work. And I was doing the morning show, which is 7 to 10 a.m. and it's 6:50, and I got to figure something out. So I just went to the business center, and that didn't go so well. And our program director's texting me like, "Why are you whispering?" Like, because they keep yelling at me.
That sounds somewhat similar to the technical issues that we would run into back pre-internet days, pre-wireless, when you're covering a high school game in the 90s, and you're barging into a McDonald's or to a hotel, and you're begging people
I filed from a Dunkin' Donuts before. I'm sorry, Baskin Robbins, not a Dunkin' Donuts.
That's crazy. I never knew you were confronted with those types of logistical.
Well, when I was in college, it was still dial-up days. We had the internet, but barely. And then because I was stringing for all these different newspapers, and they're all, now you just email the story to the editor, and they plug it in. And you probably could have done that then, but nobody was smart enough to do that. They're like, no, you have to send it straight into our system. So you'd have to do like $, ampersand, asterisk, name the story, exclamation point, $, and then hope that code worked and dumped it into the system. You dial this number, like if you're trying to send to the Tampa Tribune, you dial this 813 number and pray that it would go in without being completely garbled. Now, I never had to use a Trash 80. For those who don't know, that's the Radio Shack, the Tandy. Basically, it's a keyboard with a little tiny screen, and I think it maintained a constant connection through a phone line, and you just typed on it. You could only see like one line at a time, and if it came and there was no battery, so if it came unplugged, you lost everything you'd written. I never had to deal with that, but the sports editor at the school paper at Florida, when I was working there, had one, and I accidentally unplugged him one time and I thought he was going to kill me.
My classic high school deadline story was when I was at the Augusta paper back in the early 2000s. I run over a cop's foot who's directing traffic on my way out of the parking lot.
Oh, Lord. Did you get arrested?
Did not get arrested, but as I tried to get out of there as fast as I could, they did not take kindly to my saying, I'm a half hour from deadline. I have to file my story. They made me stay there for quite a while. So that was
I was going to say, they're not. So the best high school deadline story I ever heard is, and I wish I remembered the guy's name, but the folks who worked at the Florida Times Union, the paper in Jacksonville, told me this story. They had a stringer. A stringer is a word we newspaper people use for a freelancer. And he was covering a high school game. He gets arrested on the way home. I think he had like a bunch of unpaid speeding tickets or something. So he gets caught speeding. I think he was driving back to the office. He had no laptop. This may have been pre-laptop, pre-internet. And you have to get back to an office and type the story in. So he gets arrested. They take him in. You know how you get one phone call and everybody calls their spouse or their lawyer? He called the paper and he dictated his story. And that is dedication.
That is incredible. Absolutely incredible. So, Andy, a lot of my listeners who are in the Palmetto State probably don't know you grew up in the Palmetto State.
Yeah, well, the first 7 years. I was born in Columbia. Before my parents got divorced, my dad was stationed at Fort Jackson. And I was born at Columbia Baptist Hospital, and we lived in Columbia for 7 years. And the Clemson fans are going to be displeased to find out that I did take a liking to the local team when I was an elementary schooler, and followed them for the rest of my childhood, actually. I owned a Mike Holt jersey and a hat that played the South Carolina fight song. And a copy of the Clemson joke book.
Did you have
It got worse because my mom married my stepdad when I was 7, and he went to South Carolina. So he made sure to hammer home the Gamecock fandom. This was, back in the days when they were an independent. We actually moved to Key Largo, Florida when I was 7 years old, and that's a whole other story. But, South Carolina would play Miami pretty frequently because they were both independents at the time. And so we would go up there and watch South Carolina play Miami. And but it was interesting because I was the only South Carolina fan in the state of Florida practically. I remember when I was in high school, I still fit in that Mike Hull jersey when I was a freshman in high school, and I wore it to Gainesville. It was South Carolina's first year in the SEC, and my mom got me tickets to Florida, South Carolina, and South Carolina almost beat Florida that year. Florida wound up winning the East, but losing to Alabama in the SEC championship game that year. But Florida played an awful game that day. South Carolina was good on defense. It was Tannehill's freshman year. That's actually the only start he lost his freshman year. He threw a touchdown pass to a dude in the end zone that just got dropped, and that would have won him the game. They ended up losing 14-9. But it's funny because I didn't know much about Florida at the time, but randomly my dad had gotten tickets to the Florida-Auburn game earlier that season, and Florida had just sliced and diced Auburn. So I knew that Steve Spurrier's offense was awesome and that, they scored like 40, 50 points a game. So I was shocked to see, South Carolina holding them to 14. But yeah, I had Florida fans trying to beat me up in the bathroom. I was like 14 years old. Classy fans at the school that would become my alma mater.
So you walked on to the Gators and played for Coach Spurrier.
What's that now?
And played for Coach Spurrier.
Play is a relative term.
Practice for Coach Spurrier.
Breathing tackling dummy. But yeah, so I played offensive line at a 6A high school in Florida in suburban Orlando. And at the time, 6A was the highest classification. So I played against some really good players, wound up signing scholarships with really big schools. And I held my own against them. So I'm like, hey, I'm pretty good too. And I got recruited by some 1AA schools and didn't really want to do that. I wanted to go to a bigger school. Now I thought I was going to go to some hoity-toity private school, but those were really expensive. And so Florida was not only free, the way the scholarships worked back then, if you made pretty good grades and made a pretty good SAT score, they basically pay you to go to school there. And so it didn't make any sense. I already knew I wanted to be a reporter. And so I figured I'd work for a newspaper my whole life. I'd probably never make more than $40,000 a year. So going to, the other schools I got into were like North Carolina, Princeton, Vanderbilt, Duke. Going to one of those schools, you were going to rack up so much in loans, and I'd never be able to pay them back. So it kind of made sense. You just go to the place that's free. Well, I was like, I was pretty good at football, so I think I'll try to walk on here. and much to my chagrin, later they put me on the team. And you go out to the first practice, and then you realize you see Javon Curse with his shirt off, and you realize, whoa, I don't belong here. Because I was like, I'm 6'3". At the time, I was 238 pounds. I had been working out really hard to try to get in shape to walk on because I figured you got to be in really good shape. Well, I had lost. I was never that heavy, but I had gone from like 255 down to about 240, and I was thrown around like a rag doll because I'm an offensive guard at 240 pounds. Now, at the time, you didn't have to be 330. Like you could have started some of the starters at Florida on the offensive line were like 285. But I was eating everything in sight and I couldn't gain a pound. And so these guys are just tossing me around. Like Reggie McGrew, who is the nose tackle, who picked in the first round by the 49ers, I want to say in the 98 or 99 draft. He, have you ever seen the video of the guy who takes the cannonball to the stomach?
No.
So he was the cannonball and I was the guy, basically every play. And it was very educational. I learned a lot about how college football works. It's a giant business. It's not, a lot of fans are like, I'd give my right leg to play for the Tigers or the Gators or the Crimson Tide. No, you wouldn't. You'd hate it. You got to be a really good athlete, and you also have to be able to endure a lot of punishment. Whether you're a good player or not, you have to be able to endure a lot of punishment. The workouts, the off-season workouts especially, are really hard. I think that it's not impossible. Obviously, they're not as hard as like Navy SEAL workouts or Army Ranger workouts, but they're still really hard, and it's something that I don't think people fully appreciate how hard these guys are working. And it was interesting when I talked to the Clemson D lineman before this season. Cleveland Farrell was talking about that, and he was like, it bothered him to hear everybody saying, "Oh, you're going to be the greatest D line of all time," blah blah blah, because he felt like if you don't understand the work we put in to get here, you can't say that. And just, having dealt with those guys a little bit, I would imagine that the work they've done, because they're so hyper competitive, and because the team I walked onto my freshman year won the national championship, so I was around a lot of guys like that, and the amount of work they put in just on their own when nobody's looking, and then the amount they push the younger players is incredible. And, at Florida, there was a guy named Lawrence Wright, who was a safety, and he didn't play much in the NFL. He played for a little while, but he was a great leader. He was always on everybody. James Bates, the linebacker, was always on everybody. He was hysterical, so he was trying to make everybody laugh too. But you knew there was business to be done. There was work to be taken care of. It was just one of those things where the team kind of polices itself on that stuff. And I see that with Dabo's program. I mean, they're like that every year. The most amazing thing to me about Clemson is the way they, put 3-4 defensive linemen in the league every year and then just roll on and get some more. And it's not an accident. It's because Vic Beasley and Malachi Goodman and Grady Jarrett tell those guys when they're young how to work. And then the next group tells the younger guys how to work.
You came here on that note, I believe it was after the 15 season, after they lose Shaq Lawson, DJ Reader, a couple of others. And this was, I think, the spring of 16. And back then, the sort of surface narrative about this team was, ooh, how are they going to replace all these guys? And you were one of the only people back then who wrote, hey, look, this is a defensive line factory, and they're not going anywhere. I'll never forget that. That was, and
it feels like with Clemson, they've been able to do it with D linemen and receivers. Their receivers are the same deal, where they just sort of, the young guys the old guys teach the young guys, and they just roll on. Now they haven't been able to they haven't always had top shelf talent every single year, or had them ready every single. Last year's a good example. Like, there was nobody to replace Mike Williams. T. Higgins is that guy now. He was not that guy as a freshman. They didn't have it quite ready. But it does seem like that's a group that replenishes itself pretty well.
Business owners out there, if you own a business that accepts credit cards, you need to listen up. Tandem Payment, based right here in the upstate, run by Clemson folks, is changing the face of payment processing, quickly becoming the most cost-effective solution for all small businesses. Tandem's program saves you up to 90% on processing charges and gives your customers what they love most, choices. This is not some crazy introductory offer. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. If you want to know more, visit tandempayment.com today. Former Tiger Hot Rod McDowell works over there at Tandem Payment. They handle all their business and customer service face-to-face. So give them a call, 864-672-1570, if you're tired of spending an arm and a leg on all those credit card processing fees. Recently, Andy, you wrote a fantastic story on Dabo's 10-year anniversary.
I had some help with that. There was some guy who works for Tiger Illustrated who helped me out on that.
No, it was great. And you talked to Dabo and others, and I guess what we've talked about this before, but what strikes you about sort of the uniqueness of the way Dabo has sort of risen and how he runs his program?
Well, he's a walk-on, and this is what he says this all the time. He just treats everything the way he treated life as a walk-on. And he did it as a coach. I mean, I always go back to Dabo's first contract after he got the full-time job, and everyone's laughing at him because he had this heavily incentive-laden contract didn't have a real big base salary. And everybody's like, why are you taking it? And I'm thinking, well, one, he didn't have any leverage when he got it. It wasn't like anybody else was trying to hire him as a head coach. So there was a reason for that, but also because he bet on himself. He knew he could do this. And that's the part about Dabo that I think is interesting, because there is the aw shucks. There's the, he's an open book. He'll tell you any story you want to hear about his life. But there has also always been this knowledge, and you can tell inside him that he knows what he's doing. And even though everybody else might not realize it yet, he's going to be great at the thing he's trying. I mean, one of the things I always like to do these what if stories. And the what if story I'd love to do is, what if Nick Saban, instead of being a GA at Kent State, had gone to work managing the service department at a car dealership, which was the other option for him at the time. He probably would own the largest ring of car dealerships in the country right now. And I realize he has his own Mercedes dealership anyway, and Dabo, what if he stayed in commercial real estate? He'd probably be a billionaire right now.
Amazing.
The funniest thing is when he talks about commercial real estate, he's talking about filling up a shopping center. He's like, you got your anchor stores, but those guys have leverage. So they're like your 5-star recruits. He's like, the real money is made with the local, get the barbecue place and get the barber shop and get the nail salon. And I'm thinking, he's describing Finding Hunter Renfrow, except it's a nail salon.
Absolutely. Andy, one of the coolest, I think the coolest little snapshot of the hour and a half that I spent with him back at his old football offices that they were in 10 years ago when Bowden was out and he was in, was actually Dan Radakovich, who is now in the office that was occupied by Tommy Bowden, and then Dabo said, "Hey, Larry, come over here. You'll never believe this." He pulled out the desk drawer. He pulled open the top drawer. There was Dabo's name. Dabo wrote his name inside that drawer back in 2008. And at first I thought it was just, okay, that's a cute little...
It's like carving it into a tree.
Yeah, that's a cute little side note. But then you start to think about it, and no. First of all, what coach would do that? Second of all, Dabo was going to leave his mark. He was going to leave evidence that he was there one way or the other.
That's right. Yeah, now Dabo is a great quote. And you interview Dabo, you're going to get great stuff. That's a given. But the story I wrote last week, that it contains one of my favorite quotes that I've ever gotten for any story. And that's when he was telling me about the phone call to his wife right after Terry Don Phillips had pointed at him and said, "Dabo, you're in charge, and you have 5 minutes to get in my office." So he calls his wife and he goes, "We just got fired and it gets worse. I'm the interim." You can't make this stuff up.
That's right. Well, I mean, the obvious there is, how many coaches out there would have said instead, "We just got fired, but hey, honey, guess what? I'm the interim," like as a good thing.
Right.
He thought it was another Mike Dubose situation, and they were in for 7 weeks of hell because he didn't think he had a legit shot at the job until 5 minutes later when Terry Dunn told him.
Everybody at that point was feeling that way because interims didn't get jobs back then. It just wasn't a thing that you did. And it's changed now, partially because of Dabo. I think Ed Orgeron's having some success, and people are realizing, okay, he knows what he's doing. But at that time, it wasn't done. Like you let the old staff run out the string and you hired somebody new.
I tried this comparison on for you a couple of weeks ago, asking you, hey, do you think, is Dabo the modern version of Bobby Bowden? And you thought it was good, but the more I think about it, is Dabo sort of a version of Bowden and Spurrier? Because Bowden never went on any rants. You know, when you cross Dabo or his program or his players, he's going to fire back. Bad. Bowden never did that I can recall.
Bowden had an edge to him that he didn't show in press conferences. Bowden's teams would kill you. Like, Bowden's teams played with a ferocity that most teams have never been able to recreate. Saban's teams play like that. Dabo's teams play like that. But see, that's the part that people don't get, because Bowden would yuck it up in the press conference, but those players were badasses and they would kill you. Like, they were scary good. And so I think the Dabo Bobby comparison is really apt. I think it's probably the closest parallel I can come up with. The gift of gab part, the Dabo and Spurrier are different. Like, Spurrier is so unique because he sees things differently than other human beings, and he has no filter whatsoever. Like, he doesn't mean to hurt everybody's feelings. He's just telling the truth. And he's just a different guy. Dabo has a lot more, I think tact would be the right word, and Bobby had that too. But behind the scenes, Dabo and Bobby are planning to kill you.
That's a great way to put it. Now, you're talking about all the what ifs over the last 10 years and beyond with Dabo. Now, you were at C.J. Spiller's press conference when he announced for Clemson. Is that right?
Yes, I was in the gym at Union County High in Lake Butler, Florida when it happened.
And, okay, take us back to that.
All right, so what you had Florida State fans on one side of the gym, Florida fans on the other side of the gym, and they're yelling back and forth at each other. Now, nobody thought C.J. Spiller was going to sign with Florida. That really wasn't considered an option. The thought was he's going to Florida State. And he had a teammate, and I can't even remember what the guy's name was, who signed with Clemson. So that guy puts on his Tiger Paw hat, and they had some other, they were a really good program. So they had some other guys signing, and CJ's last. And he says his spiel, reaches down, pulls out the hat with the Tiger Paw on it, puts it on, says he's going to Clemson, and the whole place falls dead silent. And I'm pretty sure you could hear his mom going, "What?" And she was not happy. Like, we came up and around to the table to interview him afterward, and she was not happy. She was crying, and so he was just resolute. And we asked him, "So what was it about Clemson that put it over the top?" And he's like, "The position coach who's recruiting me, I just really connected with him." And we're like, "Oh, what's his name?" And he said Dabo Swinney. And I'm like, "Can you spell that?" I had no idea who he was. And so I was like, well, I guess I probably need to follow this guy, because if you can get C.J. Spiller out of Lake Butler, that's pretty good. And then, a couple of years later, he's the interim. But no, I had unfortunately, because you don't ever really want to become part of the story, I had another run-in with C.J. and his story a year later. So I'm in Phoenix covering Florida. I was the Florida beat writer for the Tampa Tribune. I'm in Phoenix covering Florida playing Ohio State in the national championship game. Now, before the Gators had left for Arizona, I had been in Gainesville. I was driving to cover practice or something, and I noticed it was like I want to say it was an older Honda Civic that had Union County plates and a Clemson sticker on the window. And this is Christmas break, so all the players would be home if they weren't practicing for a big bowl game. Or even if they were practicing for a bowl game, this would have been their break where they didn't have to practice. And I'm like, that has to be C.J. Spiller. And I'm like, what's he doing here? Because this was the parking lot across the street from Florida Field. And so I started asking around. I was like, was C.J. Spiller in town? Was he just visiting friends? What's the deal? And nobody was saying anything. And then Florida wins the national title. And the next morning, Urban Meyer has his press conference. I don't remember who told me, but everybody was in a really great mood, even better than you would be in normally when you just won the national title. I'm like, what's going on? And somebody's like, we're going to get C.J. Spiller. And I was like, okay. So I still had C.J.'s number from his recruitment. So I called him. And he's like, yeah, I'm driving up to Clemson right now. I think I'm going to tell my coaches and come on back. And so I put a story out on the internet. And at the time, Tommy Bowden told me this 2 years later when I interviewed him for something else. So at the time, the Clemson coaches had no idea that was happening. But because the story came out and then everybody picked up on it and started asking questions, they get CJ there and they're like, hey, listen, we would rather you stay here. And they do their sales pitch for a while, and finally he's like, well, you know, I do like it here. I think I'm going to stay here. But that was crazy. Like, I wonder if it had been a couple years earlier, because if it had been a couple years earlier, I would not have put a story on the internet. I would have just put a story in the paper.
Wow.
The next morning. And he may have just gone and gotten his stuff from his dorm room or apartment at Clemson and come home.
As CJ tells it, and I just interviewed him on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, he said he was coming back to pack up his apartment and head back to Gainesville. He was going to join Tim Tebow and Percy Harvin and Urban Meyer. And I asked him, well, what happened once you got here? He said, well, Coach Swinney hopped in my car and we did some driving. He said that Dabo told him then, why would you want to go to somebody else's backyard? Why don't you can create your own backyard here? And that's what he remembers from that decision.
And that conversation got those guys the job, because if CJ is not there to return that kickoff against Boston College, they don't get the permanent job. That interim staff gets fired at the end of the season because they would have lost to Boston College, and at best they would have been 3-3 as an interim staff, but probably wouldn't have won another game.
And then beyond that, in January of 2009, CJ is deciding whether to stay for his senior year or leave for the NFL. He has a press conference scheduled. He's outside in his car by himself. He's talking to his mother. His mother and other people back home are telling him he's crazy to stay. He hangs up on his mother and goes in and announces that he's staying. So if he doesn't stay in 2009, they don't win the division. They don't win 9 games. And so therefore...
And suddenly you don't get any benefit of the doubt in 2010.
Exactly.
They had enough benefit of the doubt in 2010 to hire Chad Morris, and that sort of extended them a little longer and got them on the path. But yeah, it's amazing how many little things happen. And also, if Dabo Swinney gets in your passenger seat, you're probably going to wind up doing what he's asking you to do. I think that's probably the real lesson here.
Andy, I think we met. I remember sort of knowing of you and probably seeing you maybe at Georgia games, basketball games, maybe when you were covering Florida back when I was in Augusta. But I think I met you in 2008, which was obviously Dabo's interim.
That was my first year at SI.
That's right. It was at Florida State, and I remember that was my first game with Tiger Illustrated after I'd left the Post-and-Courier, and I remember you coming up to me and saying, "Well, that seems like a good move." And at that time, I guess a year earlier, you had been, was it laid off by the Tampa paper?
I didn't get laid off. I would have been laid off. Had I not gotten the SI job, I would have been laid off that July.
Okay.
So I get SI offers me the job in December. My first day was like January 8th, 2008. July 2nd, 2008, they axed the Florida State writer in Tallahassee and axed the position that they had never filled in Gainesville. So and it wouldn't have been a case of, hey, we love you, come back to Tampa and cover the Bucs. They would have just gotten rid of me.
10 years later, where did newspapers mess up the most? Was it ignored? Well, my belief at least is that they ignored the desires of fans who wanted recruiting coverage. They wanted message boards. They wanted all the stuff that...
Oh, I'll give you a prime example. I never understood with the Tribune after I left. I kept asking guys, I'm like, why do you keep cutting your prep staff? High school coverage is the one thing you can give people in Tampa that no one else can. Because like ESPN covers the Bucs, and SI covers the Bucs, and everybody covers the Bucs, and everybody covers the Rays, and everybody covers the Lightning. So why don't you give people what they can't get? They're like, well, I don't know. And so this was at one point they had like one person covering all the high schools in Hillsborough County. Like, that's stupid from a business standpoint. The idea is to differentiate yourself. And and the recruiting thing, people are really snobby about covering recruiting. So I actually got hired at SI to cover recruiting. I wasn't hired to cover college football. I was hired to cover college football and college basketball recruiting for SI.com. And it just wound up that I only ended up doing that for about 6 months because they realized, oh, college football is the second most popular sport in America, and we only have one person covering it. Perhaps we should have more people. But yeah, I never understood the turn your nose up at covering recruiting. I remember like the old school beat writers, and I'm sure you remember this too, Larry. Why would anybody want to go cover spring practice? Well, because they want to read about it. That's why.
Another thing, and I include myself in this too, because I was once this way. Why would a sports writer want to lower himself to converse with a fan on a message board?
Because the fans actually have some pretty good questions and good ideas, and you can do some consumer research. That's why. But yeah, there's always been this weird disconnect. That's why I mix it up with people on Twitter, because sometimes they're going to ask a question that I'm not thinking about, and you get to thinking about it and you're like, oh, that's a pretty good story idea.
I'll never forget newspaper people back, a long time ago saying we would never have message boards on our website. And now look at Twitter. It's basically a message board.
America's message board, or the world's message board, I guess. Well, and then newspapers are like, oh, I guess we're going to get on this train. Here's a comment section where you can comment anonymously. Instead of like what you guys do, where those are paying customers. And that's a place where they go to talk to other people who are like-minded and interested. So you're not going to spew filth in a place where you're paying $9.95 a month. But if you don't have to pay jack squat, you don't tell anybody who you are, you're going to spew a lot of filth.
There's also accountability, because if I mess up, Andy, if I mess up somebody's name or a stat, I'm going to know. People are going to let me know about it and know in certain terms.
And you have to be upfront with them. Like if you do that, I screwed up. I'm sorry. Like, don't make excuses. Readers hate excuses.
We will have.
I feel like the more transparent we can be about how we report these stories and do these stories, the better off we are. Because there's not a lot of trust right now. And I realize we just cover sports, and that's it's the playground. But transparent we are about how we do our jobs, the more trust you can build.
Andy, you have a show to prepare for, and you're a very busy man, so I really appreciate, on behalf of not just me, but my listeners as well, you sharing so much of your time with us.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Your listeners should know how much you've helped me through the years. Anytime I need anything, make sure my mind is right and I'm asking the right questions and all that. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Larry.
All right. Thank you, too, Andy Staples, for hanging out with us. That was really cool, really fun. Thank you, too, Parham Smith and Arch & Hold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Also, the Abernathy Boutique Hotel in Clemson. A stone's throw, or maybe a Trevor Lawrence throw, from the stadium. And Tandem Payment in Greenville. Thanks mostly to all of you for making this a twice-weekly part of your routine. Next podcast scheduled to be published on Friday morning, so stay tuned for that. Everybody have a great week. Cheers.